Sarah. I'm so rusty filming this video. It's been literally months since I sat down to film anything. Life's just been not even chaotic. I haven't sat down and filmed. So I just thought I'd do a little reading wrap up of the books I've read so far in 2025, since we're nearing the end of March now. I've put a little montage in of all the stuff I've been doing this year so far. It's been a great year so far. I went to Chester at the start of the year, which is sort of the nearest city to where I grew up, and met up with some friends. We went for our sort of delayed Christmas dinner because it was cancelled because of bad weather before Christmas. That was lovely, and it was really nice to just spend some time like in the city that I spent my formative years in, and haven't really been back to a whole lot since. It was just nice and nostalgic, and I met up with my mum for coffee, which was really nice because I don't see my mum really at all, maybe like once a year if that, so that was nice. Then we went to Disneyland with my son, just Disneyland Paris. We've been before and my son really liked it. My son's disabled, he has a physical and intellectual disability, and Disneyland Paris is just amazing for him to go to, so we had a lot of fun there, just doing all the rides and enjoying the atmosphere, even though it was really cold, a lot colder than when we went in June. I celebrated my birthday, went to North Berwick with some friends, and we did a dip in the sea, which was really fucking cold. So we didn't stay in for very long, and then we went to the spa and just had a nice day, just relaxing, and had a lovely meal. And I went to Faro in Portugal by myself for a week after my birthday. Just the idea was to get a little bit of winter sun, but the weather wasn't that great. It rained sort of maybe about 50% of the time I was there, but I did get a little bit of a suntan, which is now faded, and just had a really nice time just relaxing on the beach. Went to see some dolphins, which was really cool. And yeah, just it's been a nice chilled year, but also a really busy year with lots of stuff going on. That's what I've been up to. If you are even remotely interested, now I'll talk about some of the books I've been reading. My first vlog of the year, I covered a couple of books I won't talk about in this wrap up, so I'll just do all the books that I've read since then and not spoken about, but there'll probably be like varying degrees of like me talking about them because some were just a lot more memorable than others. So the first one I read was Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher, which unfortunately I didn't enjoy very much. I gave this one 2 stars. I loved A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher. Haven't got on with anything else that they've written so far. I thought I might get on with this because it's a fairy tale retelling. We're getting the perspective of it's a Sleeping Beauty retelling, but from the perspective of essentially Maleficent, but not quite. It's a character called Toadling, and she's basically a girl who transforms into a toad at will, and she has been tasked with keeping this princess locked in a tower, but we don't know why she's doing that. It seems like there's a reason that she's scared of, and she doesn't want anybody to find this tower or let this princess out. And then a soldier comes along one day, I can't even remember his name, and he sort of is like, I want to rescue this princess, and Toadling is trying to stop him, basically. I liked the character of Toadling. I thought like she's a very prickly character and doesn't really like sort of interacting with people. The soldier character I didn't like. I found him really annoying because I found him very similar to myself, just apologising all the time. Like he'll like kill or hurt someone and be like, oh my god, I'm so sorry, and like it just reminded me of myself, and I found him really annoying. The vibes are definitely there. I liked sort of like the world it was set in. It just didn't really have like a fixed time. It was very much like a fantasy world in that you couldn't really tell like what time period it was even set in. But I think the book Leo described it really well when she said it's like looking at a really beautiful painting, but no portal ever opens like into that painting, so you can't get immersed into the world. And I definitely felt like that. I don't know if I'll carry on with T. Kingfisher, to be honest, because there was just like one hit for me, and the other 2 that I've read obviously Thornhedge, and I DNF'd not Nettle and Bone. I read a chapter of Nettle and Bone and didn't get on with it, but I might go back to it and what was that, The Hollow Places, I really didn't like, so I DNF'd that. So if you have any recommendations for somebody who absolutely loved A Sorceress Comes to Call but hasn't enjoyed anything else by T. Kingfisher so far, please let me know what I should read, or if there's any other like books, it doesn't have to be T. Kingfisher, that give the vibes of A Sorceress Comes to Call. I would be very open to reading them. Then I read A Psalm for the Wild Bill by Becky Chambers, and this is a cozy sci-fi. I don't really read sci-fi, but it's sci-fi light. Like it's a sci-fi setting, as in it's set on like a planet called Panga, and is I guess a utopia of sorts, but other than that, it's not particularly sci-fi heavy. Like there's not a lot of complex or intricate world building. We're following a character who is quite unfulfilled in their life and decides that they want to seek a career with more purpose, and so they become a tea monk, which is basically somebody who travels around offering tea and basically like therapy sessions to people who are just in need of like somewhere to vent and someone to like make them feel good, to de-stress them, and they think that this is going to be what sort of fulfills them, and they feel like this is their going to be their purpose in life, and it turns out that it isn't, and so this tea monk, they set off on an adventure that is like, I need to get away from all of this. They set off on an adventure and sort of go into like some like other lands essentially, where they come into contact with a robot who is part of a race of robots who broke from society a long time ago and just sort of like went to live in the wilderness, and now nobody has any contact with them because they live in this sort of inaccessible I want to say wasteland. I guess it's like a wasteland, like basically really far away, nobody can get there, and they encounter each other and they're just like trying to learn from each other, I guess, and they have these conversations about their lives and like what it means to be fulfilled. I found this book very charming and uplifting. What I took from it is that you can live in this amazing utopia where everything is supposed to be great, and just you will still feel like unfulfilled. You're still a human being. You can still feel like something's missing, and that's not because there's something wrong with you. That's just the human sort of urge and need to constantly be evolving and exploring about yourself, about the world around you. It's really just hammering home that it's okay to feel unfulfilled sometimes. It's okay that you just need a break from the world sometimes. And it was just very cozy. I wouldn't carry on with the series, but I'm glad I read it. I read it in its entirety. It's only short. I read it on the train from Edinburgh down to Chester, and it was, yeah, it was a really nice, pleasant way to pass a train ride. I read The New Seoul Park Jelly Massacre, and this is by Cho Yun and translated from the Korean by Yi Won Jung. This is essentially a collection of intertwined short stories / a novella, because you get different perspectives, but you also like get them again. So like a character from like the first story comes back again like later on, if you see what I mean. And this is about a theme park which is like kind of similar to like Disneyland, that kind of vibe, and it's supposed to be like, you know, the most magical place on earth. You're supposed to be having an amazing time, and we're following a collection of people who for one reason or another just are dissatisfied with their lives. There may be like employees of the park, that may be people who are going. The first story is a young girl who's taken there by her parents, and her parents just having a massive row, and she just wants them to get along and just like basically doesn't want to be there. It's sticky, it's sweltering, it's a really hot day, and she spots a guy handing out jellies to people, just being like, this is the most amazing jelly you'll ever eat. And then these people eat the jelly and are basically transformed into jelly, and this jelly just takes over the entire park, and you get, like I said, lots of different perspectives. You get the perspective of somebody who is turned into jelly, and they are sort of navigating the theme park as a jelly. You get the CEO of the park, their perspective in a very sinister story, like disgruntled employees, just like people who have seen this thing happen, this like unexplained event where loads of people have basically like disappeared in the park. It's all very like mysterious from the outside, and only the people who are really sort of involved in the actual event know what's actually happened. This was fun, quite graphic at times. It wasn't really like scary as such. I found it quite tongue-in-cheek. But yeah, it was entertaining, and I'm glad that I read this. Then I guess I'll just mention Witch Hat Atelier Volume 2. This is by Kamomi Shirahama, and it's translated from the Japanese by Stephen Kohler. This is the last of the kind of like more light-hearted books that I read. It's the second in a manga series following a witch called Coco, who finds herself being apprenticed to a witch and just having to learn the ropes. She goes to a magical school. Her relationship with the other girls there is sometimes a bit fraught. I think the author does a really good job of portraying like adolescent relationships, particularly adolescent girls within this. There's a bit of peril, a bit of adventure when the girls sort of embark on a side quest, and yeah, I'm really enjoying this series. I think if you like Studio Ghibli, you will really enjoy this. I think the art and the dialogue are spot on. I want to live in this world. If you like cozy fantasy, then I would definitely give this a shot. Then I read Empty Houses by Brenda Navarro, translated from Spanish by Sophie Hughes. This was absolutely brutal and very difficult to read, and just I want to preface this review. I think I wouldn't recommend this to a lot of people, not because it wasn't good. I did think it was a very good book, but it's so difficult to read for a number of reasons. So we're following two perspectives in this. It's set in Mexico City, in two different neighbourhoods. We have a more affluent neighbourhood, and we're following a woman whose young son Daniel has disappeared shortly after his second birthday, and the other perspective is from the point of view of the woman who kidnapped him, and they live in the same city but just in like very different parts of the city. So one is quite affluent and the other one is from a very poverty-stricken neighbourhood. The mother of Daniel is obviously grieving for him and feels like her life has come to a complete standstill, and is distressed by sort of how the world is just carrying on as normal around her. She has a very strained relationship with her husband. It's mostly unspoken, but he clearly sort of blames her for her son disappearing. She blames herself. They have a very fraught relationship, and she also has a fraught relationship with their sort of adopted daughter. She didn't ever want this adopted daughter to become part of their family. It's just like circumstance like propelled her into their lives. The question of why was it him and not you who was taken has always been unspoken, and then she eventually speaks it out loud, and that just causes the relationship to just spiral to the point where it's basically unsalvageable. And we're dealing with the aftermath of this boy's disappearance, but also the paradox of the grief that this mother feels that her son has disappeared, combined with her never wanting him in the first place. He was unplanned, and she didn't want to be a mother, and she didn't particularly enjoy being a mother. Daniel is autistic, and she didn't cope with that very well. The way autism is spoken about within the book was very difficult to read, and I don't think always very sensitively dealt with. Obviously we know there are parents who don't deal with their autistic children in a positive way. We know there are people who abuse their children. We know there are people who have sort of negative and derogatory opinions about autistic people. Like, I know that I'm autistic, but it didn't feel like it was just the perspective of the parents. It kind of felt like, I don't know, a bit of authorial input. I don't want to say like 100%, but it didn't sit entirely well with me. It is about a family coming to terms with the fact that their child is disabled and he has these needs, and that his behaviour is challenging, it is difficult, but I just think it was a bit clumsy and uncomfortable in the way that it was handled by both perspectives. I found the perspective of the woman who stole the child to be deeply unsettling and uncomfortable deliberately. That's not like a criticism. It felt very realistic. She's in an abusive relationship. She isn't in a good financial situation, and sort of you get the reasons for her taking this child, and it starts to become apparent that she's like very unwell. And yeah, the whole thing was just very complex, messy. I love a book that delves into like taboos of motherhood, like talking about having children and then later regretting it, or just having not wanted children in the first place and just gone along with it because that's what you're expected to do. Like Sophie Hughes as a translator, I've read quite a lot of things that were translated by her, including another one that I read later on. I do sometimes find her translations a little bit jarring, in that there's lots of British like slang within it, and like when people are being derogatory about each other, it reads very British, and like it sort of takes me out of the story a little bit sometimes, because it's set in Mexico. It just, because their dialogue felt so British to me, but otherwise it was really, really well done. And I think if you are like emotionally ready for a book like this, then it's well worth reading. I don't know if I'm just recommending it because Sophie Hughes translates Fernanda Melchor's books, but if you liked Hurricane Season, then I would definitely give this one a go. I then read Clear by Karis Davis, which was just an absolute joy of a book. Not in the sense that it was like a joyful subject matter, I just thought it was very, very good. This is a historical fiction set in the mid-19th century, and again, a dual perspective. Love a dual perspective. We're following a character called Ivor, who is the sole inhabitant of a remote Scottish island. All the other inhabitants of the island, including his family members, have left, not really through choice. They haven't been like forcibly removed, but the island has been sort of like gradually been made sort of inhospitable, and they've been given sort of like perks to move sort of to the mainland. We know these aren't necessarily what they were promised, but basically everybody but Ivor has gone, and Ivor sort of enjoys this life, just where it's just him and his animals, and he's quite content to live this very rustic lifestyle. And then along comes John Ferguson, who is a church minister who is really struggling financially, and in order to make some money for his church and himself, he takes on the mission of going to this remote island at the behest of the government to evict Ivor. And he knows it's going to be quite difficult because Ivor doesn't speak any English, he doesn't speak Scots, and John doesn't speak his language because Ivor's the only person on this island. No one really knows the language. It's all but extinct at this point. John is shipwrecked on the way to the island, and he is found by Ivor, who takes him to his house and nurses him back to health. And because the two have this language barrier, John can't tell him sort of outright why he's there, and he's just trying to find the right words to explain to him. But then he forms a relationship with Ivor. They become close, and he at this point just keeps putting it off until he's just like, I can't tell him why I'm actually here. And it's a real rumination on language and the nuances of it as the two of them sort of manage to communicate. They learn a bit of each other's languages. They create a dictionary for them to translate what each other are saying. And even though they can't have sort of very in-depth conversations, they just form a really close relationship and start to really appreciate each other's company. And then sort of as they spend more time together, there is definitely sort of a homosexual undertone to their relationship, which John is very conflicted about because he has a wife at home, Mary, who's waiting for him to come home. And yeah, it's just really beautiful, very quiet. I think if you like Claire Keegan, you would like this. It's very sparse, very slice of life, and you're really getting inside these characters' heads. There's just really not much plot going on at all, and I loved it. The ending lost me a little bit, not in terms of what happened, it's just I know a few people are just like, what the fuck, by the ending. It is kind of like that, it just comes out of nowhere a little bit, but I just think it ended too abruptly for me, and I would have liked to have seen the relationship continue to grow with sort of what happens at the end. It's I make it sound like a big twist, it's not, I just don't want to spoil too much for you. But yeah, overall really recommend this. I was clearly on a bit of a Welsh reading kick in February because Carys Davies is a Welsh author, and so is Joshua Jones, who wrote Local Fires. This is the collection of short stories all set in Llanelli, which is a very dilapidated and deprived seaside town in Wales, and we're following the lives of many different inhabitants within this small town, and this is just perfection to me. Absolute 5-star, best book I've read this year so far. I loved it so much. Joshua Jones is queer and autistic, and a lot of the stories focus on queerness and neurodivergence within this small town and identity as a Welsh person. That sort of lack of identity, I suppose, like linked to your Welshness, and finding it difficult to have a home and an identity linked to Wales when there is just nothing really there for you. There's a distinct lack of job opportunities, homophobia is rife, transphobia is rife, there aren't services for autistic people. The whole country has just been completely like demolished, like under like successive governments that have just, you know, either forgotten about Wales as a country or just like actively worked to destroy it and to destroy that connection of Welsh people with their culture and language and heritage. And it was just so beautiful. I loved it so much, and I really related to it as a Welsh person who feels, I don't want to say proud, because I said before, I don't like think you can really feel proud of like where you're born, but like I feel an affinity with Wales. Like I'm Welsh and that's where I grew up and that's where like my home is, but I also like find it very difficult to connect to like my Welshness, just because of how Wales is like as a country, and just feeling like there's no place there for me, and it's just a very complicated relationship. So I loved seeing that explored in these short stories, and yeah, highly recommend. I think if you read any of the books on this list, please make it this one. It's so good. Never read Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I read this when I was in Portugal and it got soaked by the rain, it got absolutely trashed at the beach, and it just has like a real like musty vibe to it now. It just feels so like crunchy and salty and damp, and I think that's just like perfect for the kind of book that this is. So I didn't really know anything about this going into it, and I think maybe that's the best way to be. I did expect it to be a bit more sort of fantasy heavy than it was. It definitely is a fantasy, but I was just expecting it to be like more fantasy leaning, and that's not a criticism. I enjoyed it. I'd say it took me to about 100 pages to get into it. For the first 100 pages I was just like, I don't know what's going on, I don't really care, I don't want to read this. And then we got past 100 pages and I like powered through it. I thought it was really good. So we're following a character called Piranesi who lives in what's essentially a labyrinth by the sea, and his existence is dictated by tide. So like the corridors of this labyrinth are like flooded periodically. He's completely cut off from any civilization apart from one person called the Other. And as we go through the book, he is discovering more about himself at the same time as we are. we sort of are then learning like why he's here, what this place is, and it becomes like kind of scary, not scary in like a horror way, it's just kind of like it's just really tense and unsettling. And I loved the exploration of trauma in this. I loved just really getting inside Piranesi's head, because he has nothing else, like nobody else in his life. Like we really are just like in this one character, and it's just very cloying. Like the atmosphere is very cloying. It feels just like you can tell you're by the sea when you're reading it. The atmosphere was just, yeah, spot on. The writing was just like very evocative, and it's like when Susanna Clarke is describing a smell, you can smell it. Like when she's describing the sound, you can hear it. I've never read anything like this before, and I think it's so hard to talk about what this is until you've read it. And this is one of the most challenging books I've ever had in terms of like trying to describe to someone what this is and why they should read it. But it was a lot more accessible than I thought it was going to be. Like I said, a lot less fantasy leaning than I thought, which was good for me. And yeah, I think read it by the sea, like read it in like a sort of warmer environment. Definitely one for the summer. I think maybe like late summer, like getting in towards like September. But yeah, it's so good. I don't know how else to market this book other than if you like to be a bit confused and not really know what's going on, but also be deeply unsettled and a bit terrified at times, you'll like this. Maybe if you like Vita Nostra, try this. I then read Perfection by Vincenzo Latronico. I kind of picked this up on a whim. It was available at the library and it's very short, so I just thought I'm going to read that on the plane home. This is translated by Sophie Hughes from Italian, and it's up for the International Booker. It's on the long list this year. I'm following a couple called Anna and Tom who have moved to Berlin from Italy, and they're sort of living as digital nomads. They have their own like web design business, and it's just about their life and their increasing frustration and lack of fulfillment with their life. They are an elder millennial couple, so sort of like born like mid-80s kind of era, and they sort of moved to Berlin sort of when the digital nomad era was really kicking off, and were just like loving their life when they moved, like always going out to dinner, and so it's had like a really active social life. But sort of as they've aged and society has developed in a way that maybe they're not the biggest fans of, they've sort of come to feel very unfulfilled with their life. You know, they're not mixing with Germans, they don't speak the German language very well, and they just feel increasingly ostracized as more people in their friendship group are just like saying, you know what, this lifestyle's not for me. I can't be arsed with the high rent and just like the impossibility of trying to find somewhere to live and like living paycheck to paycheck. I'm sick of it. I'm going back home and I'm going to raise a family and do all the things I said I was never going to do. And they're just feeling like just, yeah, increasingly ostracized and just like, well, what are we even doing with our lives? Like they don't necessarily want to start a family or do any of the things that like they're like supposed to do, and they just want a change. And it's about them basically subletting their flat and then going off on like embarking on trying to find themselves and trying to find more purpose in their life, and just their relationship becomes increasingly fraught. I really enjoyed like the discussion they were having about a couple who've been together for a long time, as they've been together since they were teenagers, and just like they're so happy as a couple but also feeling like, are we doing the right thing by being together? Like they go to sex clubs, for example, and they're just like, oh, like we should want to spice up our sex life. Like, is our sex life unfulfilling? And sort of like feeling this sense of failure, I suppose, that they have settled down with each other and just being like, oh, maybe like we shouldn't have you know, taken that traditional route. Like, everyone around us is going to like these sex clubs and is having like all these different relationships and all these different sexual partners, and like, why don't I want that? Like, am I just a failure for just wanting like a boring life? They're also a very politically active couple who just like want to get involved. Like, it's set predominantly around the refugee crisis, sort of maybe about like 10 years ago, and it's just them sort of like wanting to help but just basically being a hindrance. Like, there's like, what can I actually do to make this better? Like, they try volunteering at soup kitchens, and they're just getting in the way. They're not really making a difference, and they're just like, I'm clearly just like doing this for performative reasons, and just like, it's their dissatisfaction with trying to be politically engaged and politically active, and yet just being like, what the fuck can I even do in this like situation? Like, how can I make this better? There's just no way to make this better. It's just an awful situation. And yeah, I enjoyed it. I really liked the way it ended, actually. I don't want to say like exactly what happens. It's again a very plotless book. We are just basically following their internal monologues. But yeah, I think the way it ended was very realistic and pessimistic as well, and very, what's the word I'm looking for? Cynical. So yeah, I thought that worked really well, and overall I did really enjoy this book. Like I said, I read it really quickly just on the plane back from Portugal. Then finally I read Hunchback by Sayu Ichikawa, and this is translated from the Japanese by Polly Barton. This is another book that's up for the International Booker, and the reason that I was so keen to read this is because it's written by a disabled author. And Sayu Ichikawa is the first author with a physical disability to receive the Akutagawa Prize in Japan. I think I'm reluctant to call books radical because I think it's a bit wonky to say that, but like, this does feel like very radical to me because it's written by an author with a very visible disability talking about sex, and that's just something that as a society just isn't really spoken about. Like, disability and sex is still very much like taboo subjects, and we still as a society view disabled people as like non-sexual entities. It just does feel quite transgressive for a book that is dealing with disability and sexuality in such a graphic way has been published. Unfortunately, that's just how it is, and so I am really glad that this has been published and translated into English. Both the author and the protagonist have a congenital muscle disorder. They both use a wheelchair, and they have like significant curvature of the spine, which affects their day-to-day life in numerous different ways. I don't really have any idea what accessibility and attitudes towards disabled people are like in Japan. I kind of got the impression from this book that not good, because she just lives in this care home sort of away from everybody else and never really goes outside. She uses a ventilator and just basically has a very stagnant life in this care home, and so to escape that she uses social media to have another like persona basically, and writes sort of very graphic and kind of outrageous stories, like erotic stories on a website about visiting sex clubs. The way it's written, her two personas kind of like merge together into one. I really like what this book is doing. It makes you feel quite trapped in the protagonist's body, but the author is also like very critical of using like disability as metaphor in that way, and like it really makes you like examine sort of your relationship with disability and like the kind of metaphors that you use to describe it. I really liked the discussion in this about the inaccessibility of the publishing world in terms of like physical books, like how inaccessible it is to read a physical book while you're reading a physical book. It was just like, it really challenges you on your like attitudes towards disability and like prejudices you didn't really realise you had. Basically, I liked this, but I wish it had been longer, or I wish it had been an essay maybe. I don't think the short form worked for me personally, because I wanted to see more. I really wanted more of this character and more of the different worlds that she inhabits, or I would have liked to have seen the author write an essay about her own life, because I really like her writing style. It just didn't really work for me in the form that it was in, but I'm really glad to see it on the International Book Along list. So that is all the books that I've read since sort of mid-January to like mid-March kind of time. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you've been reading and what you've been getting up to in the comments, and if you have any book recommendations for me based on everything I've spoken about, feel free to leave them down below. Thanks so much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you again soon. Bye.